Good morning. Welcome to the inaugural event of the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Rowan University. We are delighted to have you with us as we celebrate our panel today, 100 Years of Speaking Through the Ballot, Women in Political Communication. I'm Dr. Julie Haynes, and I serve as the director for our center. And as many of you know, we are an affiliate of the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Florida International University. It is my honor to introduce the executive director of the LLK Center at FIU, who is also an alumna, a generous donor to Rowan, and a leader who has impacted the advancement of countless women in communication fields. Please help me welcome Dr. Lillian Lodge Copenhagen.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. I am delighted. We are up to 119 people. This is fantastic. And I'm really delighted to be with you all today for the inauguration of this Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Rowan University. We at the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Florida International University in Miami are excited about the collaboration between our two universities and the opportunities for all of our students. I congratulate Dean Sanford Tweedy and Professor Julie Haynes for their foresight in realizing the need for such a center at this time in our history. Our two universities will be working together over the next years to share programs and ideas such as this workshop today. So we hope to have something for you, either in a cooperative effort or one-on-one, literally every month in the coming year. So look forward to virtual workshops like this. Again, Julie and Sandy, congratulations on your new center. And we look forward to our collaboration in the future. And thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Copenhagen. Again, our appreciation for you reaching out to us, and we are certainly thrilled to be a part of it. Next, I would like to introduce the Dean of the Rick Edelman College of Communication and Creative Arts, Dr. Sanford Tweedy.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Lillian. This is really an exciting time. Hearing, there's so much negativity surrounding the health situation, the political situation, the socioeconomic situation. So, this is really exciting that we're able to do this. And I really need to thank Lillian for putting this into our wheelhouse and saying, you really need to think about this. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that Julie Haynes has already done to get this started. And I really think, affiliating with the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center at FIU is going to be a great advantage of this, because the collaborative efforts we can put together between the two universities is going to be vital to both our success, but also to sharing resources. One of the things we were going to do is, some of you may know, in the spring, we were going to have students attend the annual conference down at FIU. They will be able to attend the virtual session of that now, but we really think getting the students moving between the campuses will be, and getting to know each other and seeing the similarities and differences of what goes on is going to be an amazing experience for them. So I'm really looking forward to everything that is going to happen, that's already happened. Again, I want to thank everyone, Michele, and Heather. I want to apologize. I'm actually supposed to be in a different event right now, so I am going to check out for a while, but I'm going to try to come back after I make my presence known there, and hopefully it won't last too long. So I'm sure this is going to be a great program today, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to miss at least part of it. So thank you, everyone.
It's now my great pleasure to introduce our two participants for today's virtual workshop. I will introduce both speakers, and then Dr. Ramsey will be speaking of her research first, and then we'll hear from Ms. Simmons. Michele Ramsey is an associate professor of communication arts and sciences and women's studies at Penn State Berks. Her scholarship in feminist and media feminist media and rhetorical criticism, political communication, women's rights rhetoric, and social movements, has been published extensively in the top communication and women's studies journals in our field. And she is also the co-author of the hot off the presses book I'm very excited to be reading, Major Decisions, College, Career, and the Case for the Humanities. She teaches courses in women's public address, Black American political rhetoric, gender and communication, contemporary American political rhetoric, and women in leadership. And Ms. Heather Simmons serves as Gloucester County, New Jersey freeholder, whose title is soon to be commissioner in January of 2021. And she also serves as the director of University Business Outreach at Rowan University. She sits on the boards of New Jersey Association of Counties and the Delaware Regional Planning Commission. She was named one of South Jersey Biz Magazine's Women to Watch and named Woman of the Year, Women in Communications by the Gloucester County Commission on Women. As a freeholder, her focus is on the integral tie between education, job creation, and the health of small business. I'm delighted to have both of them who've been both generous with their time and their expertise. Since we are celebrating or commemorating the 100th year that at least white women could vote in a US presidential election, I thought it was fitting to ask Michele to speak on her work on women's suffrage at the turn of the century, or particularly in 1918 to 1920. She will give you more information on that, but please help me welcome Michele, who will be speaking on women's suffrage political cartoons.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Rowan University, Florida International, Dr. Haynes, Dr. Tweedy, and Dr. Copenhaver. I really appreciate you having me here. I don't think it's lost on any of us that it's a bummer that in the 100th year of our celebration of the right to vote, we can't do anything publicly. So I'm really thrilled that you're working on this way. And congratulations for opening the center. It's amazing, and I'm completely jealous. 1900 to 1920 is what I studied in whole, and that's often called the doldrums for suffrage historians, because there wasn't really any policy happening, not a lot of policy change happening at that time. But what I argue is that while there wasn't a lot of policy change, there were a lot of really important rhetorical inventions happening for the suffrage movement, and that may have helped policy changes like the 19th Amendment and other policy changes later on down the line. So while nothing was going on policy-wise for the suffrage movement from 1900 to 1920, there was a lot going on in terms of context. You had a decent amount of progressive legislation moving through the country. You had the advent of the affordable automobile, which changed the natures of public and private sphere for men and women. And you had World War I. And so my research covered all of these things, but what I'm going to focus on today is the suffrage cartoons in response to World War I, and how they were skilled in exploiting the rhetorical opportunity that World War I offered them in terms of changing notions of womanhood, and especially definitions of what it meant to be a loyal citizen who deserved all the rights of citizenship. Both men and women were citizens from the get-go. Anybody who was up against the British Patriots were considered citizens, but the rights and obligations of citizenship still aren't, but certainly were in 1917, divided equally between men and women. So we didn't have the same rights and obligations in 1917, even though we were all considered citizens. The nature of combat during World War I had changed. We had all these technological changes that meant that being an important part of the war effort wasn't just about fighting in the actual war in combat. You had munitions now. And so you had people working in munitions, you had women overseas driving, being nurses, and doing all kinds of things that changed the nature of what it meant to be an important part of the war effort. And so what suffragists did was they used that work that they were doing in World War I to argue for enfranchisement based on a redefinition of what it meant to be a loyal citizen. And I do want to point out that when you're talking about the first wave of the suffrage movement, and my research in particular, these are representations of white women, which speaks to the really problematic racism that a lot of suffrage rhetoric sometimes relied on. But I want to make that clear that we're talking about representations of white women here. So let's start with the first cartoon. I'm not sure who's sharing it on the screen. There it is. So the first groups of cartoons dealt with representing women as strong, competent, and essential parts of the war effort. And so you see here a woman with her fist clenched. She's leaning over his desk, invading his space. She's pointing to all of these jobs that are both feminine and masculine in terms of links to gender orientation, and saying, these are all the things I've done. These are all the things women have done. What have you done? So she's making that obvious argument for women's war work deserving of suffrage, but she's also challenging the senator and saying, essentially, what have you done? And maybe I've done more than you. Why do you get to vote and I don't get to? The second one in this series comes from a group of cartoons called Win the War Women. And these were images of the jobs that women did during World War I. And so you would see all kinds of nurses, doctors, farmers, speakers, munition workers, knitters. They had all of these great images of these women who were doing really important things for the war. And they were in this example here, the motorcyclist, healthy, happy, smiling to be doing war work. And in other images, often stern and serious to communicate the seriousness with which they took the work. So these cartoons were about showing people literally the work that women were doing, whether it be more skewed towards masculine behavior or feminine gender stereotypes. That's what they were trying to show, that they were doing all of this work. The second set of cartoons that I looked at represented motherhood in specific ways. And so this is where number 3 comes in. And they specifically represented a mother's relationship to her son. So in this one, you see a woman looking down at her son, and you know it's her son because it says, "Women bring all voters into the world, let women vote." And so the cartoon works to equate the work of motherhood and rearing the men who will vote and the men who will fight our wars with work deserving of suffrage rights. But I think for an audience in 1917, there's an underlying argument there that maybe we might not see. And that is, in 1917, it was really painful and really dangerous to give birth. And so I think there's an underlying argument there that even the process of giving birth to voting citizens and citizens who fought for war was something that women might suffer and die to do for her country. And therefore, that was deserving of suffrage as well. Finally, in this fourth cartoon, you're going to see an example of the last set of arguments I talk about, and that is the positioning of the United States as hypocrite during World War I. And what suffragists did is they used the battle cry of democracy. That was a really huge part of the propaganda of World War I to argue against the United States denying them the right to vote. So in this fourth cartoon, you see a mother and her son, and he is informing her that he's just come back from Germany where women are allowed to vote. And so I think the cartoon's important for 3 reasons. First, he clearly is pointing to the hypocrisy of the United States, right? That he's going over to fight for democracy in a place where they seem to have more democracy in terms of women's participation. The text and the image connote that he takes her very seriously. He takes her concerns seriously. And that may be a pull to generational change and a suggestion that we get along with the times and these new generations who are coming home and realizing how important democracy is, and we need to go in their direction. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, It may be a little hard to see here, but the soldier has wound stripes on his jacket. And so those wound stripes are from his battle to protect a democracy in which his own mother cannot participate. And I think that's a particularly strong argument that you see in this cartoon. And so that's just a very, short version of what I looked at. But I want to note that I think they had three rhetorical strategies overall in these suffrage cartoons. First, they relied on very traditional notions of womanhood and motherhood. These were not radical looking women in any way, shape, or form. They were very traditional notions of womanhood and mothers. Then they took those traditional notions, they put them in these really contemporary settings, which allowed the visual rhetoric to work to reconstruct women as competent, essential, and smart parts of the war effort. And so they were able to recreate and recast, I guess, the idea of womanhood and the idea of loyal citizen for the country. And I think it ultimately served the movement well, and they were responding to a very specific rhetorical situation, and they took on their primary rhetorical constraint, which is the gender roles linked to being female. They took those on specifically in these cartoons with their war work, and showed that they were doing the kind of work that other people were rewarded with enfranchisement for doing. And so they created an image of womanhood that was traditional, but also redefined. And they also redefined what it meant to be a loyal citizen, or attempted to redefine, invited audiences to redefine what it meant to be a loyal citizen. I'm not trying to argue that that these cartoons created new arguments for suffrage. I don't think that they did. And I don't know if they were impactful. We don't have research on how, no one was doing research on whether or not these folks were impacted by it. But I do think what's really, really important is they created a new identity for women. And they created a new way for women in our country to look at themselves and to see themselves and to believe in themselves and the things that they were capable of accomplishing. And I think that's a really important part of the kinds of self-confidence that we need for good, solid collective action. Not only did these images work to try to convince people to move towards the pro-suffrage side of things, it invited women to see themselves in very, very different ways, and I think important ways. And I think for current generations, these kinds of rhetorical inventions are still really important, because I know for myself, I didn't know much at all about the first wave of women's suffrage, women's movement, until, there go my lights, until I took a class in it. And so I think, work like this and work by other folks who do this, who talk about the first wave, really gives us some great insight into the remarkable courage and talent and rhetorical intervention of these remarkable women who suffered, and some who lost a lot, even their lives, in getting us the first step towards liberation in this country.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramsey. It's
You're welcome.
Fascinating material. We are going to have time for questions, discussions. We've already gotten some questions and discussions. I'm going to save those till the end after we've heard next from Freeholder Simmons.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Julie? Thank you. I couldn't tell if I muted myself or not. So I want to thank, first of all, Julie Haynes and Sandy Tweedy and Michele Ramsey, and also Dr. Copenhaver for putting together today's event for a lot of reasons, but particularly because it is the inaugural event for the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communications. I'm really honored and privileged to be taking part in this. I also want to thank all of the students who are participating in today's session. I see from the chat that there are many, many students checking in for a couple of different classes and professors, and we're thrilled to have you all here listening to Dr. Ramsey and taking the time to listen to my comments as well. Dr. Haynes introduced me as a Gloucester County freeholder. I think many of the folks who are listening today or who are watching this presentation today are from New Jersey. But for those who are not, a freeholder in New Jersey is what is generally called a county commissioner in just about every other state. Freeholder is actually a very old term. New Jersey is one of the original 13 colonies, and so we still have some terms in the colonies that go back to those original first days of our union. But freeholder, the term, and this is the reason I'm bringing it up, speaks a little bit to why we're here today. The term actually applies to a free landholding, in other words, white male in the state of New Jersey who would have been applicable or able to run for the office. And so I think there are many, many of us in this presentation, including all of the presenters, who could not have been freeholders, at least until the 19th Amendment, and many of us well beyond that. And so the legislature just changed the rules. So beginning January 2021, New Jersey freeholders will be referred to as county commissioners. And so for a lot of reasons, it is the time to see that happen, particularly as a woman, and only about 29% of the freeholders in the state of New Jersey right now are women. About 33 or 34% of the legislature are women. There are a few additional folks, women who are mayors and council people at the local level, but still our percentages remain low. So it is time for us to, at least by title, have something that is more inclusive. And so I will only hold the title, by the way, of commissioner in January if I'm successful in November's election. So we don't want to make any presumptions. So I just wanted to make that clear. I am up for election this year, and if I am successful, I will hold the title of county commissioner in January. And so a little bit about what I do in my county government role. And again, I have a specific reason for bringing that up. I come from a communications background. I actually have my master's degree from Rowan. And in fact, I hesitated when I said that because when I started my master's degree, it was still Glassboro State College, and then changed to Rowan College of New Jersey, and then to Rowan University. And I know many of the students may not have even been alive when that transition took place. Gosh, that makes me feel very old, but it was quite a time. And so I actually hold my degree from what was then Rowan College of New Jersey, and then became Rowan University the following year. So I'm very thrilled and honored to be an alum of this university, to work at this university, and also to serve in government in the county where this university is located. So in a lot of ways, this feels like home to me. But my graduate degree is from the College of Communications, which was at the time called College of Communications. It's now Communications and Creative Arts. My master's is in public relations, and I feel like that training and that background, I have worked as a public relations professional for most of my professional career, most of my adult life. And I feel like that training and background in a lot of ways has prepared me for the world of politics and government. I tend to approach most issues as a communications professional. How can we gather the information? How can we seek input from all the people around us? How can we deal with crises and difficult situations and people from that communications person's perspective? And I feel like that has served me very well in government in general, but particularly as a woman, because I think it speaks a little bit to the way many women approach things. And so in my role as a freeholder, I actually oversee county economic development, which includes community development, our reemployment office, as well as workforce development. And I also oversee public works, which in Gloucester County includes engineering, roads and highways, the county fleet, mosquito control, snow removal. I get the really fun stuff, and the Solid Waste Advisory Commission. And I think that it's interesting, as the first woman freeholder in Gloucester County who is not a grandmother, which speaks a little bit to the type of woman in this county who has held this position before me, that I am also one of the first women who has what we could construe as traditionally male roles on the board. In fact, when I was first appointed to my position, I was appointed before I was elected due to some unusual circumstances. I was asked if I would prefer to oversee health or senior services, or roles that were more traditionally a female role. And I said no. I'm very happy to take on the roles that I've been assigned, and to dig into them and do my very best at it. Even so, in my first, I would say, 2 years on the board, it was very difficult to be taken seriously. And I think as women in politics, and if you watch the movies or read anything about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it was something that she struggled with, and many other women have struggled with, is to be taken seriously. I am one of the younger freeholders. I'm no longer the youngest, which kind of annoys me, but I used to be. And I am only 4'11". And so like many women, when I walk into a room, I have a much smaller appearance than the men. And so just on, initial, their initial read on me, perhaps I'm not taken as seriously. And I find that as a woman, as a communications professional, and now as an elected official, that the way that I combat that is to be the expert on whatever subject we are approaching, is to make sure that I don't go into a meeting unless I know what the outcome's going to be as much as possible, and that I am the most prepared person in the room, so that I am looked upon as someone with a lot of credibility. And that takes a little bit of time to build up, but if there's anything that I can suggest to students, that whatever the field is that you choose to pursue, that and I'm sure Dr. Haynes and Dr. Ramsey and Dr. Copenhaver can agree with me, that whatever room you walk into, whatever meeting or situation you walk into, the more prepared you are, the better you are. And so a little bit about rhetoric and how women tend to be portrayed. I think I broke this into 3 areas. And one is, how are women in general portrayed through rhetoric? And it was really interesting to look at some of the illustrations that Dr. Ramsey showed, particularly the motherhood cartoon, and how women are portrayed publicly in terms of the roles that they undertake that may not be what we construe as traditionally female roles. And I think it's interesting if we take those images, which are almost 100 years old, and translate them into something that's happening today. If we're looking at the hearings for Judge Barrett taking place in Washington for the Supreme Court, I thought it was interesting the other day, right on the first day of the hearings, that one of the things they asked her about was, how would she rule on a case that involved one of her children? And I cringed when I heard that question, and I thought, how strange that they would ask a woman that question, and they may not ask a man. Like, what if one of your sons were involved in a situation that you had to adjudicate? How comfortable would you be doing so fairly? And it was phrased differently than that, but that was the upshoot of it. And I was very uncomfortable with that. So I think it's interesting that even in 2020, we're still hearing women almost spoken down to in a way. Could you be fair despite the fact that that would be your child? What I find also in terms of how women are portrayed through rhetoric in general is that we tend to be portrayed less formally. I've been in situations personally with groups of elected officials. And as we get introduced, they go down the line and it's Senator so-and-so or Assemblyman so-and-so, Mayor so-and-so, and Heather. And they don't use my last name and they don't use my title. They tend to use just my first name. So there tends to be a little bit of a lack of formality, even right from the start, right from when I'm introduced. And that's not something that has happened once or twice. It happens fairly consistently. And it sets me up as different from the others and in a sense, less formal, less serious, less capable than the others. And so I find that right from the start, I'm put in the position of having to confound expectations of my abilities to present a topic seriously.
Yes, thank you so much, Freeholder Simmons. I really appreciate it. Fascinating discussions from both of you. If you have questions for either of the panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. And we're going to be spending the next time that we have discussing those questions and exploring issues together. We've already gotten a few questions, so I will pose a few of those. Both Professor Ramsey and I are in rhetorical studies and have a similar background. And there is scholarship in that area on the feminine style of female politicians. And there's a great article by Bonnie Dow and Mary Borton on Ann Richards, who was the governor of Texas. Michele and I have actually never met, but we also grew up in Texas. So we also are big Ann Richards people. But in this article, they talk about how women need to conform to a feminine style or do conform to a feminine style of discourse when speaking. And the article's been a little controversial because it suggests that sort of might be essentializing that. And then other folks say, no, it's actually, we're conditioned to be that way. But one of the elements that they talk about in this feminine style is being highly self-disclosive and also constantly referring to family, your role as a mother. And both Michele and Heather have talked about how the Supreme Court nominee Barrett, and I would also argue they've talked about their roles, particularly as mothers. So I wondered if both or either of you could speak to that a little bit more, because it definitely seems to be a connection between your presentations and from before and from 100 years ago to now.
So Bonnie was my dissertation director, so I don't want to get in trouble by not responding. So Bonnie's dissertation director was Carolyn Corse Campbell, and she wrote a piece in the 1970s about women's liberation rhetoric as being oxymoronic. And her essential argument was every time a woman stands up to engage in the public sphere, the political sphere, she's automatically bumping up against what a public person is supposed to be, or a leader is supposed to be, because those things are defined typically as masculine. And I think Heather talks, about some of that in her piece. And so when women stand up, they are going up against traditional definitions that don't tend to include them with regard to leadership, and especially political leadership. And so I think when Dow and Tunn wrote that piece, I think what's important about it is recognizing that people like Ann Richards, who, yes, I adore, found a way around that. And so I get the argument that you want to be very careful about essentializing. I don't think that's what Bonnie and Mary were doing, but it's not Ann Richards' essential nature. It was her primary role for the majority of her adult life before she got into politics. So it makes sense that she would refer to that. But also when she's engaging in a sphere where, especially in Texas, and if you don't know anything about the guy she was running up against, he suggested that women just lay back and enjoy getting raped because it was going to happen anyway. And so that's who she was running against. think about how she had to frame herself in that sort of public sphere, political sphere in a place like Texas. And so she took, like the suffragists in the first wave, she took what she could and what would resonate with her audience, which is her emotions, her caretaking for all citizens of Texas, not just certain citizens. And she parlayed that motherhood experience into sort of caring for all others. And so I thought it was incredibly savvy of her to use that, just as the first wave suffragists did, to take that work and transport it into a new context and change the meaning of what a leader in Texas might look like.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ramsey. I really like the way that you phrase that, because as a woman in government and politics, like Dr. Haynes suggested, it is something that I mentioned, that I am a stepmother and have been a wife, and those are parts of what makes me who I am. And so I don't ever try to deny that, and I will very often mention it to different audiences or in different things that I do in public. But by the same token, we are none of us one-dimensional people. We have many facets of our lives that go into making us who we are. And some of those components are very feminine. We are mothers or stepmothers, caretakers, and different things in our lives. And we have different interests because of those things. But there are also other facets of our personality that may be more masculine or more something else that we also bring to the table. And I think to portray women one-dimensionally, which sometimes happens in the rhetoric, is not taking into account the full person.
One of the other questions that we had was directed to Freeholder Simmons about what advice you might give younger people in general, certainly younger women, about entering politics. Is being in student government helpful for that? Is communication, wink, wink, helpful for that? What kinds of advice would you give folks?
So I do think being involved in student government is very important. I think gaining an understanding of whatever institution, whatever part of life you're in, gaining an understanding of how that institution or group runs, where the money comes from, how money is allocated, what the politics are, how decisions are made, learning how those types of dynamics work, whether you're a student, at an institution, or new to a municipality or new to a new state. I think learning those things is very important. And so getting involved in student government is a great first step in that. Getting involved in student media, I find, is also a very good way. I think a very important skill, that it almost doesn't matter what your major is. I do find that there are some very important skills that you can bring to the table in politics. And one of them, and I've mentioned it a few times, in budgeting. A lot of people with an MBA do very well in government and politics because they understand those budgeting processes, and again, where money comes from and how it impacts how decisions are made. That's extremely important. Another area, of course, is politics. If you're a politics major, you certainly learn the structure of governments and how to navigate governments and have access to internships and people who can help you define a career path for yourself within government or politics.
And I think that a lot of students don't necessarily think about a communication degree as setting them up well for political involvement, but clearly you're showcasing that it absolutely does.
I think it really does, because what I learned from my graduate degree in public relations, right? So that area of communication was planning and budgeting. So taking a complex issue or initiative and being able to strategize how to achieve your goal in that initiative. And so that's an extremely important skill. And it was one that was really emphasized in terms of the graduate degree at Rowan, and still is, in public relations. I remember developing my thesis and working with my advisors at Rowan, and them saying, once you have your plan completed, you can bring it to any job interview and it will help you get a job. And of course, we all roll our eyes. Yes, for sure, for sure. But absolutely, it was very, very true that the ability to synthesize something that's complex and develop a cohesive, meaningful plan and a timeline and a budget and deal with all the constraints that are present in that is a very applicable skill to the world of politics, particularly.
Again, a question for Michele. If we know anything about the artists who drew the political cartoons, do we know anything about them? And I know we have, I think I mentioned to you before, we have communication and creative arts. So we have our art department. We probably have some art students on the call and faculty.
Yeah, the cartoonists were men and women, and they were well recognized men and women. And so it wasn't the case that they were just sort of suffragists in the basement drawing stuff. These were very well recognized cartoonists who were regularly shown in major publications like Ladies' Home Journal or New York Times or whatever. And again, male and female. Probably the most famous was Rose O'Neill, who created what we call the Cupid doll. She created that image and did those cartoons, and she put out a lot of pro-suffrage cartoons. They weren't the ones that I looked at, because I just looked at them in the Woman Citizen, the primary publication for the National Suffrage Movement organization. But there were suffrage cartoons in a lot of different places, and she's definitely in my research, the most famous.
What kinds of things do you think that we have gained in 100 years? We sort of talked about like the thread of things being similar, but
yeah, it's always interesting to teach women's studies to college students, because college females are the most equal they're ever going to be right now, and they come back to me a lot later and go, yeah, you were right. This isn't equal. This isn't fair. And so I think it's really important that students especially understand how far we've come in a relatively short period of time. We still have a long way to go, but in the 70s, women couldn't have credit in their names. Women couldn't divorce their husbands unless there was like physical danger. There was no such thing as no-fault divorce, and so women couldn't leave. Women were denied entrance into certain college majors, most college majors. We had Title IX that came in and stopped some of that, and women could be in sports, and it was funded. There are all kinds of things that we regularly take for granted. There go my lights. And I think we have to remember those things. 48% of college students voted in 2016. And now we're looking at Roe versus Wade being overturned relatively quickly. And I think that those things are not disconnected. And so I would really ask students to do some research and find out just how recently we got these rights, and to understand that they don't necessarily always stay there, and that you have to continue voting, you have to continue political participation. And I think it's great when, in the 90s, we had sort of the third wave start, and there was a lot about individualism and recognizing who I am as a person and focusing on me and girl power and that sort of stuff. And that stuff's great. But the primary thing that changes the material consequences of women's lives is policy change, is laws changing. And so if we don't fight collectively, those laws don't change. And even worse, what we're looking at right now, those laws can be reversed.
Thank you so much to everyone for joining today. I want to say a special note of thanks to our speakers, Heather and Michele, Dean Tweedy, Dr. Copenhaver. I'd also like to acknowledge the expert assistance of Liliana Bro, who is the Research Associate and Program Coordinator for the LLK Center at FIU, and she's who everyone got emails from and keeps the ship sailing. So I appreciate her very much. And I also wanted to thank Gina DiBartolo and Karen Brager from our Rowan team for their assistance. Please do join us for future events. We will be having another one. Dr. Copenhagen in January is our next one, correct? And
Yes, we'll be planning one every month, so we'll
I
get the information out.
we greatly appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, please feel reach out to me. And thank you again, Dr. Simmons, Dr. Copenhagen, Freeholder Simmons, Dr. Ramsey, and everyone involved. I really appreciate it. And have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.